For those people who are listening to the recording, not to the live stream, my name is Lauren Winch and I'm the manager of the Bristol Poverty Institute, and this is our first online webinar in this series. So the Bristol Poverty Institute, as I mentioned, was launched in 2017, and we're specifically aimed to drive forward the university's research on causes, effects and measurements of poverty, and that's in order to inform better policy and practice. And one of the areas originally in our business case was to really emphasise the multidimensional and interdisciplinary nature of poverty, and to bring together researchers and practitioners from different fields to work together to tackle these complex issues. So that's one of the reasons we launched this seminar series a couple of years ago, with the aims of facilitating networking, exposing researchers to different perspectives and approaches, and showcasing the range and value of research on poverty relevant themes around the university. So not just poverty research, but poverty relevant research. And through that, setting new collaborations in motion. So we've run a wide range of different seminars. So we've had conflict, we've had debt, we've had digital inclusion, childhood obesity, is one of our upcoming ones. So all of these have strong, important poverty dimensions, and obviously energy for poverty, fuel poverty, goes without saying that the poverty is central to these discussions that we're going to be talking about today. So these are primarily aimed at a University of Bristol audience, but we've actually also started opening up to select external attendees who can add value and nuance to the discussion, and to help identify areas of synergy and opportunities for collaboration beyond the university. So a couple of the people who are joining us today are actually potentially involved in an upcoming Horizon 2020 bid in this space, and they're keen to potentially have academic collaboration on that bid. So this could be a good opportunity to identify areas of complementary interest and expertise for that bid. So we're lucky to actually have 7 fantastic speakers today, which is more than normal, but we just had so many good people that we went with it. And they're going to introduce us to a range of different approaches and perspectives on energy and fuel poverty, and how we might be able to tackle this with sustainable solutions as well. Because obviously it's not just about today, it's about the future, with growing populations and growing demands and industrialisation. So we need to kind of look ahead. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give the speakers 5 minutes each. That's going to be strictly timed. I have a DIY sign for that, just because we do have a lot of speakers, but we've also got quite a lot of other attendees who might have questions or thoughts they want to share. So we want to be able to make the most of the time that we've got here today. So what we'll do after the presentations is I'll do a kind of a round table essentially, and then we'll open it up to the floor. And I'll give instructions for how we're going to be handling that on this virtual platform when we get there. So I'm going to hand over now to our first speaker. I'm just checking the window to make sure they have actually joined us yet. Okay, I'm going to change the order slightly because our first speaker doesn't appear to be in the meeting yet. So if it's all right with you, Sam Williamson, I'm going to start with you. So first is Dr. Sam Williamson, who's a lecturer in electrical and engineering with a research focus of sustainable and renewable electrical energy systems. So Sam's research targets empowering and enabling communities, both large and small, to be able to support themselves using tools, techniques and services locally available, especially in the international development context. So Sam, do you want to go ahead?
Lauren, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Brilliant. So yes, thank you very much. So my name is Sam Williamson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about energy access and how that sort of relates to poverty in this area as well. And I think one place to start, as I'm at the very beginning, is to think about the definition of fuel poverty. And I think a lot of what people talk about is talking about 10% of income being spent on fuel or energy, and I think we can use those sort of things interchangeably. And when you're taking that into an international development context, how does that work when maybe communities are agrarian communities and they're not actually working within a monetary world? And so how can you create a definition for fuel poverty there. And so one that an international NGO has come up with called Practical Action, they've said it's the lack of adequate modern energy for the basic needs of cooking, warmth and lighting, and essential energy services for schools, health centres and income generation. And so that for me is a bit of a wider context, and thinking about, what is energy poverty, what is fuel poverty, and thinking about it, I say, in this wider context, in this wider definition. And alongside this, there's a concept of, in the international development world in energy, there's a concept of a multi-tiered energy access. And so you can start off with no energy access at all at this tier 0. You don't have any, or especially electricity access. And so you have nothing, and then maybe you have a single light bulb, and you can get this for maybe 4 hours in the day and the night, and that's tier 1. And this builds up to tier 5, which is what we have, and 24 hours access of energy. So the next question is, why is energy really important in international development context and for this? And I think thinking about it, I always think about a catch-22 situation. Energy does impact lots of different parts of our lives, and we need energy to provide services for lighting, cooking, cooling, heating, information, and earning a living. And if you don't have the right energy and the right sort of energy to be able to provide these services, then you often have to spend more time and more money to be able to do this. And you're spending more money on things that you don't, or that you could get at a cheaper rate if you were using more modern and sustainable energy. And so this is a real issue, and you get into this a cycle of, you don't have the right energy access to be able to do something, so you have to spend more time doing it and more money doing it, and therefore you can't afford your positive energy access in the first place, your sustainable energy access to be able to do what you want to do. And as an example for this, we've been looking at cooking. So in Nepal, and we've been looking at transitioning from cooking from biomass to cooking with electricity, which is a huge thing. One of the issues with cooking is that it takes a lot of energy, and so you're looking at sort of 2-3 kilowatt hours. If you think about normal little solar systems that people would use in their house, they might have 20-50 watt solar panels, and there's definitely not enough support for that to be able to extend to cooking, and cooking requires a lot more energy from this. And so a lot of communities use biomass to be able to cook with, and the community that we were working in Nepal, it took them about a day to be able to collect the fuel wood that they needed for a week's worth of cooking. And so that meant that they weren't able to either go into schools and support their education, or earn a living and be able to gain more income from that. And in fact, when we transitioned them over to an electric cooking source, we were able to show that the costs associated with the electric cooking were effectively half a day's, or a bit less than half a day's wages. And so if you compare that to the amount of cost effectively that comes from collecting the wood, you're saving half a day's wages in there, which can develop a real benefit for them, because they're able to have more time. Thank you, Lauren. More time and therefore more money. And I think that the sort of last point I wanted to talk about quickly is think about sustainable solutions as well. And what are sustainable solutions for energy access especially in remote communities and small communities? And it's looking at, my belief is it's looking at local solutions. And another example in Nepal is that they have developed their own local industry to be able to build micro hydro systems there. And we've looked around, and we've been working or done some research in looking at how locally made micro hydro systems are sustainable, how we can improve them, why they fail, but also what are the benefits are. and being able to generate that income in that area, being able to generate a higher level of sustainability due to fixing, maintenance, and operational knowledge in that area is a real key to this. And so energy access has all these sort of parts to it, and I think that's and has with sustainability, and I think it links really well together. But I think one of the key questions is, how can you measure energy poverty in these sort of situations? What are the key measures for that? And that's something I'll be interested to talk about at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sam. That was really interesting. Going up first, I know it's not everyone likes doing that. So next, I'm going to hand over to the director of the Bristol Poverty Institute and Professor of Social Justice, Professor David Gordon. So David has written and edited over 200 books and papers and reports on poverty, inequality and social exclusion, social justice, social policy, and has advised governments, international agencies and task forces across the world on multi-dimensional poverty issues. He's also done valuable work on fuel poverty in more local contexts, and that's what we're going to hear about today. So over to you, David. Just need to unmute your microphone, David, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I'm still struggling with the technology from time to time. I've done a lot of work on poverty in general, but I'm going to talk about some of the work we've done on fuel poverty in particular, and in particular in association with William and his colleagues at the Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol in the past. And all this work has been geared really to trying to improve fuel poverty policy in the UK. From that point of view, it's probably could be considered almost an abject failure, because fuel poverty policy has gone from bad to virtually non-existent, but you can but try. So the kind of work that we have been doing is basically based on the premise of umpteen studies which have shown that the cheapest and most effective way that the UK can move rapidly towards a sustainable low carbon economy and also improve the lives of people who are suffering from fuel poverty is by basically insulating people's homes and raising their income so they can afford to buy the fuel they need, and or controlling the price of that fuel so that people are not having fuel that's too expensive, which means they can't get on with the other things they need to buy in their lives. The government in the UK used to have, across the UK, used to have policies to insulate people's homes, and companies like cooperative companies like Eager used to do a lot of that insulation. Unfortunately, those policies were changed, and most of the money that's meant to be spent on eradicating fuel poverty is meant to be spent by the industry. They, of course, have a commercial interest in people using more fuel and making bigger profits, not necessarily people using less fuel. People were meant to take out loans at large rates of interest compared to commercial loans in order to pay for these new policies under the Green Deal. Those policies, I mean, I don't think I ever met a civil servant who privately believed they were ever going to work, but they obviously failed. So what we've tried to do, particularly to help in local areas, was to produce small area estimates of fuel poverty down to tiny areas, so that local authorities and governments, where in some countries with more progressive policies, in Wales particularly and Scotland, could target those areas of high fuel poverty need. These are quite complex models because they're not just based on the characteristics of the house in terms of its thermal efficiency, but also the characteristics of the occupants, such as how much money they actually can afford to spend on fuel. One of the problems is that although the UK has one of the most sophisticated measures of fuel poverty, it still is far from optimal. The government organised a review in England under colleagues from LSE who hadn't done much work on fuel poverty, and the measure they came up with, although better in some ways, actually wasn't very useful for policy purposes because it didn't change very much whatever governments did, and therefore that means that if nothing changes, you don't know if the policies are working. So to do small area estimates, we take the government's fuel poverty surveys, which have a lot of information and good measures of fuel poverty. But to get down to small areas, we need to use census and administrative data, which are not designed for measuring fuel poverty. And you have a common set of variables in the survey and in the census, which you can then use to match and produce a synthetic model to estimate fuel poverty at small areas. Of course, technology has moved on since these initial synthetic models, and we can now use hierarchical Bayesian models to get much better fuel poverty estimates, and also with the EPCs, energy performance certificates, becoming available for millions of households. We have much better estimates at small areas on the energy efficiency of households, and we also have meter readings which tell us how much energy households are actually using compared to their needs according to the EPC for small postcode areas. So much better models are now available. Unfortunately, the policies aren't in place to do much with those models should we generate them. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, David. Just realised that my signs come up back to front on the camera, so apologies for the back to front lettering. I'll get that sorted. So we're going to move now on to our third speaker, who is Peter Thomas, a doctoral researcher based across both geographical sciences and engineering. So he's particularly interested in access to energy in humanitarian relief. And Peter's current research investigates the energy needs and priorities of refugee communities in Rwanda. So Peter's also spent several years in industry, primarily working in the renewable energy and low emissions transport fields. So he's got a breadth of knowledge across academia and industry, which could be really, really interesting for this. So I'll hand over to you now, Peter.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so as Lauren mentioned, my research is about energy access, primarily in refugee camps, but I also sort of consider humanitarian relief generally. So I'll sort of rattle through a few things that I'm doing and a sort of few ideas particularly related to energy poverty and sustainability and things like that. So it's worth mentioning first that energy has been a sort of known issue in humanitarian settings for at least 20 years, but even today it's not viewed as an essential sort of requirement, particularly in emergency settings, and it doesn't form part of the coordination models and the response frameworks that are used in both emergency situations and protracted refugee crises. So particularly the refugee coordination model, which is UNHCR's system, and the Interagency Standing Committee cluster system. So what that means is that as a result, it's not really systematically considered, and it's poorly funded by donors. And that means in turn that refugees and displaced people often rely on unsafe technologies which are unreliable, polluting and expensive. And this is known to exacerbate a sort of wide range of issues across different areas such as health, education, protection, food and nutrition. So in terms of the energy that people use, typically there's a reliance on three-stone fires for cooking, and displaced families are usually receive less fuel than they need, and that means they typically have to go out and collect firewood from the local environment, which has a whole range of implication, and firewood collection is causing massive environmental damage around refugee camps in many countries around the world. And that also has significant implications, and there's been quite a bit of research done on the impact that has on women and girls, particularly because they're the ones who usually responsible for collecting firewood and then in turn cooking as well. So they sort of face this double issue of needing to go outside the camps, which are reasonably safe to collect firewood, potentially exposing themselves to sexual and gender-based violence, although sort of a caution around, the firewood collection isn't necessarily the cause of that. And then the impact of cooking with fuels in the household as well, and the impacts that has on their health. Where households can't collect enough firewood, there's evidence of them skipping meals, selling food to buy firewood instead, reducing the portion size of their food, which has implications then for the nutritional value that they're getting. In terms of access to lighting, households typically rely on traditional technologies such as kerosene lanterns, which are both dangerous and polluting and expensive for the quality of light that you get. They also rely on candles, improvised torches, and by that I mean batteries sort of taped together, connected with a small LED. Their mobile phones for lighting, or in the worst cases where households can't afford any lighting, they have nothing at all. So once it gets dark, that's it. This has implications again for things like education. It prevents people from taking part in productive activities at night, socializing with their families and communicating amongst different groups, etc. In terms of how much refugees there's a variety of estimates, but most sort of indicate that households spend about 15 to 30% of their income on energy. So that's for cooking and for electricity access, which is, as I say, usually basic lighting, a mobile phone charging, and cooking. The problem is that the alternatives are often expensive, even with a subsidy. So in Rwanda, where I'm working, where most of my work is, a typical solar home system, which provides basic lighting access and maybe access to something like a fan or a TV, a mobile phone charging, will cost about 250,000 Rwandan francs to purchase outright, compared to a sort of monthly spend among these households of about 1,000 Rwandan francs. It's worth noting that there is willingness and to some extent capacity among some households to pay, but you can see that there's a big sort of difference between what the system costs and how much households have to spend. And this challenge is exacerbated by unreliable and seasonal incomes that many refugee households have, and because refugees are typically viewed as a risky customer by the private sector companies that are operating to some extent quite successfully in a lot of countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The good news is that this is starting to change, and there's been some sort of key policy developments over the last few years which are helping to improve this. Thanks, Lauren. SE for All and SDG 7 displays people being included in the tracking frameworks for both of those just over the last few years, and a variety of humanitarian reform policies, in particular the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, Agenda for Humanity, and Global Compacts on Refugees and Migrants. And UNHCR specifically launched a new energy challenge recently and a new energy strategy, which built on some of the work that they had previously been doing. And there are, over the last few years as well, a couple of new projects that are really quite actively trying to change the situation in camps. So the project I'm involved with, Renewable Energy for Refugees, but also things like humanitarian energy and energy for displacement, the Moving Energy Initiative, and the Global Plan of Action on Sustainable Energy. So yeah, there's starting to be changes there. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Peter. That was really, really interesting. I'm sure there'll be people with questions and comments when we get to the open portion of discussion. That's great, thank you. Excuse me. So next we're going to hear from Caroline Bird. So Caroline is a research associate in computer sciences. Her research interests are in the interdisciplinary cross-sectoral issues of environmental sustainability and more specifically community action, energy and climate change, and sustainable urban environments. So Caroline, I believe, is currently working with colleagues in computer science to explore how household energy management can be supported through peer-to-peer trading platforms and automated demand shifting services to reduce peak loads. So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Lauren. It's really nice to join you guys, and I guess I've got a slightly different take on this from some of the other colleagues who've already presented. I might also say that I'm also a director and chair of Bristol Energy Network, which is an umbrella organisation for community energy in the city. So some of the projects I'm working on have some overlap with what we're doing in Ben as well. So as a social scientist currently engaged in engineering projects, my role is really to look at the human interaction element of emerging solutions for a sustainable future energy system. So I'm thinking about how people feel about future energy systems, what their impacts might be societally, how we ensure that those who are already disadvantaged don't further lose out, and so on. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago on the role of intermediaries in addressing energy justice as well, so that's relevant to this discussion. So as you said, I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment, actually. First, looking at energy markets and managing energy demand and possibly the role and scope of automation within that. Energy demand obviously helps to shift energy use where it's movable to less congested times of the day, for example, where energy is cheaper and more available. But because consumers are largely disengaged with energy markets, automation helps to improve uptake of energy shifting mechanisms. So my role in this project has been to talk to people through interviews and workshops to explore the human interaction implications of this. For example, how people feel about appliances being controlled by something external, what their drivers might be for participating, and what safeguards might need to be in place, and how we can ensure that everybody can benefit and that people who might already be disadvantaged are not further disadvantaged. So, for example, richer households might be able to afford new technology that enables them to easily automate, whilst poorer ones cannot. Money might be an important driver in encouraging shifting of energy use, but those already in fuel poverty might be forced to make more inconvenient decisions to save small amounts of money, whilst wealthier households might not see the rewards as sufficient to change behaviour. So this means we need to think quite carefully about how we motivate and reward changes and understand better different segments of the energy market. And we're actually trialling a simplified approach to energy automation at the moment with a small number of households in different economic circumstances. Try shifting washing machine use as an example. And this is part of the wider Replicate project, which is led by Bristol City Council, but it also ties into something called the household supplier energy market. And another aspect of that project is to look at the localization of supply and demand for energy and how the changing shape of a distributed and localized energy system might start to operate. So in the future, there'll be lots of micro generators who consume the power that they produce and want to sell back some. So how might new energy markets start to emerge? What are the business models? How might people trade between themselves? And who can engage in these markets? So for example, again, is it only people who can afford to? How do you bring in other consumers who can't currently afford to? As I said previously, consumers are largely disengaged with energy, so they want comfort for least cost. But many consumers don't even think about changing to lower cost tariffs. And there are issues around trust. Who trusts? What do people trust? Who do they trust? Do they trust their energy providers? Might they trust new technical service providers? Do they need some sort of government intervention? What sort of information needs to be provided? And we can make comparisons when we think about variable energy pricing, such as how air travel is priced at different times for different times of the day. Supermarket delivery slots cost different amounts at different times, Uber and so on. Another project I'm involved in is the Energy Rev project, which is a big multifaceted project looking at transitioning to smart local energy systems. Thanks, Lauren. We're taking a sectoral approach to look at what skills are needed now and in the future to grow a more sustainable new approach to energy. I've only recently started working on this project, but it also ties in with something that we're doing with Bristol Energy Network, thinking about what skills we need for the future and how we can make sure that those skills are provided now and that we can train people, particularly thinking about the economic impacts of new low carbon systems and how we bring the right sort of skills and training in. Particularly to parts of the city where incomes are historically low, so that those people can benefit particularly. I could talk about loads more about what the Energy Network's doing as well, but that's probably enough for now.
Great, thank you very much, Caroline. And obviously you're very welcome to discuss those other issues when we get to the open portion of the discussion. So even though you've already spoken, you're very welcome to speak more, if that makes sense.
Okay,
So
thanks.
thank you. Thanks very much for all the insights there. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Colin Nolden. So Colin is a Vice-Chancellor's Fellow working on energy and climate governance in the School of Law. So his research interests span sustainable energy policy, regulation, business models and markets at the intersection of climate change and mobility. He's currently working as a researcher for Riding Sunbeams, which is a consortium which aims to directly connect solar power into electrified railway lines to power trains, which that sounds really fascinating to me. So hoping to hear more about that. Over to you now, Colin.
Thank you, Lauren. I hope you can all see and hear me. Hope the light is all right as well. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things now. So part of my work is linked to my directorship of Community Energy South, which is a company based outside of Lewis, and this will link in quite nicely to what Caroline was talking about, because Community Energy South has a similar role in the southeast of the UK. It's a networking organisation. We have 30 member organisations, which are individual community energy groups around the southeast. And these groups engage in energy generation, in energy efficiency, in fuel poverty advice and the likes. And I'm just going to first of all explain what the outcomes of this network have been so far. So Community Energy South includes over 30 members, and the work that we're doing is supported by the Big Energy Savings Network, the Community Energy Coalition, UK Power Network, Southern Gas Network, European Regional Development Fund, Community Energy England, Low Carbon Across the South East, which is known as LOCASE, and the Green Growth Platform. And our member organisations between March 2019 and March 2020 engaged in 403 energy events, which are outreach events mostly. In total, we have reached 2,452 households, and the fuel poverty advice that has been undertaken by our members has saved £74,252 on energy bills. This is the energy bills of these 2,452 people. In total, this involved 1,612 one-to-one energy consultations. We've also trained 217 frontline workers, and we have reached out to 184 people through a particular project which is called Faith and Power, where we have engaged with churches and mosques to reach the communities that usually are much more difficult to reach out to because of cultural differences. So that's generally the success story. Now, as David pointed out, the money that is provided by companies such as Southern Gas Network and UKPN is kind of seen as a bit of a greenwashing exercise, because they're not vertically integrated utilities as you have, for example, in the US. There is little desire for these companies to actually reduce energy demand, because they make their money by selling units of energy or by distributing and transmitting energy. So even though they're mandated to do something about fuel and energy poverty, in practice they just set aside relatively small funds, and then they rely on organisations with a large voluntary workforce to do the hard work for them. So the reporting for the likes of UKPN and Southern Gas Network and so on is very complicated, and often we are talking about pots of money that might be 20, 30, 40,000 pounds a year, but the reporting can easily take a week or two, and this is just to write it up and get it into the right format for these organisations. So there is a feeling, again, as David pointed out, that there isn't really much of fuel or energy poverty policy in place at the moment. It's just these companies that feel like there's a social obligation to do something about fuel and energy poverty without really knowing what to do. And then there's organisations like Citizens Advice, which are increasingly muscling their way into the this advice space, sometimes more successfully, sometimes less so. They've been known to more or less take away grants from organisations that have a more grassroots base and potentially are better in touch with their local communities. So what we're doing at Community Energy South, which is also similar to what I believe Bristol City Council is doing, looking to apply for Horizon 2020 funding. So there's several pots of money. In total, there's 64 million euros available for research and activities around energy efficiency. Thank you, Lauren. Energy efficiency and fuel poverty. And so Bristol City Council, I'm aware they're looking potentially to apply for funding together with the City of Antwerp. And in the southeast, there's similar considerations. There's Community Energy South is considering teaming up with some of its membership organisations to apply for this funding to establish a better platform to gain from economies of scale, avoid too much repetition, and ultimately move to building envelope improvement. Again, as David pointed out, this is really the only way to address fuel poverty is by improving the fabric of the buildings where people live in. And I'm also a member of, which is quite a new development, it is the Coalition for Energy Efficiency of Buildings, and lots of demonstrators will be going ahead this year. Now, most of them are just about trialing it and about the financial model behind it. But hopefully some of these models that will be trialed will also have some application in the hard to treat sector, and especially among social landlords and so on that house most of the people in fuel poverty. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that, Colin. It was really interesting, and I'm sure they'll be interested in potentially getting involved with that bid development and working with your various connections. So hopefully we can open that up after we've had our final two speakers. So the penultimate speaker is Dr. Ed Atkins, who is a lecturer in geographical sciences. So Ed's research is based on the contested character of environmental and energy policy, politics and governance. So Ed's focus is on the local politics of energy generation and consumption, and he also teaches on units such as World in Crisis, key concepts in human physical geography, sustainable development and environment policy and politics. So over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Lauren. Can everyone hear me and see me okay? Great, okay. Yeah, so as Lauren says, I'm based at the School of Geographical Sciences. I'm a social scientist, started calling me a political geographer, which I am slowly embracing. My research focuses on large-scale energy generation and use, and how energy relations interact with wider questions of political economy. So I'm thinking of uneven development here, energy sacrifice zones, but these broader questions of who benefits from an energy transition and who bears the burden. I guess the thing that I'd like to bring to this table is two notions, one of which Caroline has already discussed, that being energy justice, or the framework in which we can make decisions about energy policy, its development, its distribution, in which justice is put at its core. And secondly, and linked to this, is a socially just decarbonisation, or a fair or equitable process of moving towards this post-carbon society. This process must seek fairness and equity with regards to major justice concerns such as, but not limited to, ethnicity, income, gender and class. Recent experiences such as the Yellow Vests, the protesters in France, have highlighted the importance of an integrated approach that takes into account environmental, economic, social, cultural and psychological dimensions in any transition to a post-carbon economy. So admittedly, energy justice is bigger than energy poverty. It exists at multiple scales of energy relations at the sites of generation, of transmission and of use. So to give a quick example from my own work, I've spent 5 years now or so researching the Belo Monte mega dam in Brazil, which provides hydroelectricity to cities 2,000 kilometers away. You often find in this case that the people who have been displaced by this project, who have been impacted by this project, are not connected to the energy grid itself. So the energy that they have actually suffered for, quite literally, passes over their heads, never to be seen again. So we see this maldistribution of costs and benefits in what is, by name, a sustainable energy transition. But what I'm most excited to talk to you about today is these concepts of a just transition, and increasingly what's becoming known as a Green New Deal. I've been working with a number of groups for a couple of years in the UK on this Green New Deal, kind of putting together a vision of where sustainability and social equity can be fused in environmental policies. The individuals and communities that stand to be most negatively impacted by decarbonisation policies are often already losing out in existing socio-economic arrangements. When I think about the links between energy poverty and decarbonisation, I think of feed-in tariffs and government subsidies going to those who could not only afford to put solar panels on their roofs, but can also afford to own the homes that these roofs sit upon. In a world of inequality and precarity existing on spatial and class and racial and generational terms, it is a necessity to address blind spots in previous policies. A Green New Deal looks at social energy issues as synergistic, with socially inclusive solutions prioritised. It calls for new stimulus policies that create more jobs, protect the environment, and allow for short-term returns and longer-term cost savings. Targeted investment could seek to bridge the gaps between energy efficiency measures and wider social challenges. And we can see this with what Colin's been discussing with his work with churches and mosques in the southeast of the UK. But it's also worth noting the importance of rental properties in this as well. So in the 2011 census, 21% of Bristol's properties were socially rented, 24% were privately rented. That was 9 years ago. These numbers have changed, but it's still key that these properties form the ground upon which a new transition is built. This is more of a provocation than anything, I suppose, and I've got no idea how I'm doing with time. I'm keeping an eye on Lauren. But energy poverty and a just transition are not mutually exclusive. They can enhance one another. Policies and the vision of a Green New Deal have been recast in recent months as a form of green recovery, the government seeking to stimulate economic growth in a post-coronavirus world. Thanks, Lauren. Environmental ministers from 17 EU countries, including Germany and France, have called for a post-pandemic stimulus package that has a Green New Deal at its core, this social and environmental kind of synergy in policy. Investor organisations, central bankers, finance ministers and economists have joined this call, and researchers have urged the UK government to make a green recovery a prominent element of future climate negotiations. As there was during the 2008 recession, this new period of economic uncertainty and flux can change how we see stimulus packages in the economy. It can form new synergies between economic development and environmental health, with new stimulus policies able to create more jobs, protect the environment, and allow for short-term returns and longer-term cost savings. And energy poverty should be at its core. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Ed. As you said, it's a really interesting kind of food for thought, and hopefully we'll be able to pick up some of those issues when we move to the open discussion. I suspect COVID will come up in that, because obviously it's in every conversation everyone has at the moment. But just before we move to that, we do have one final speaker. So we're going to hear from Hannah Spudgeon, who is leading on Bristol City Council's Fuel Poverty Action Plan, and also engaged with that potential Horizon 2020 bid I mentioned previously. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Lauren. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay. Well, that's been really interesting listening to what everybody's doing, and a lot of people throughout the last hour have mentioned a lot of the things in my presentation. So I will try and just cover the highlights. Some of the work that Ed was talking about, I think, would really feed into some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So just a quick introduction to me. My name's Hannah Spudgeon. I'm a programme manager for the Energy Service at Bristol City Council. The Energy Service is predominantly engaged with reaching carbon neutrality by the new target of 2030. So looking at carbon reduction, I deal with the operational delivery in both commercial and domestic settings. And as other people have spoken about, increasing the energy efficiency of domestic properties can help alleviate and reduce fuel poverty. So the fuel poverty agenda for the council has kind of landed in our lap, and in the last couple of years we've been carrying out work to help drive the strategy for the council. some of the stuff that we worked on was the JSNA chapter, and I know there's a couple of people here today who helped shape and work on that. That is a joint strategic needs assessment. It's produced by predominantly by the health sector, and it's looking at the situation in Bristol, what's going on in Bristol, what can be done or what has been done elsewhere. And that is a publicly available document, so if anyone wants to go and have a look at it, they can find it on the Bristol City Council website. Now, in the JSNA, there were a couple of recommendations that came out of it that we put forward. And the two key ones was to produce a single point of contact for people in fuel poverty in the city, and to produce a fuel poverty strategy or action plan, as we've now called it, for Bristol. Now, we were lucky enough to secure some funding last year to help increase the capacity of a service that was already running in Bristol called Warmer Homes Advice and Money, WHAM. And that is the single point of contact service that we've helped to do. And in the expansion of WHAM last year, they brought on board Citizens Advice and the Bristol Energy Network, and they also expanded into North Somerset. And it's made up of CSE, Talking Money, and We Care and Repair. And then there's the fuel poverty action plan that Lauren mentioned. We are currently working on that. We're approaching it with a one city approach, so I hope everyone's got a vague idea of what the one city plan is for Bristol, but it's effectively an idea that a strategy is not held by the City Council alone. It's a collaborative coming together of organisations in the city to help achieve a positive goal for the city. So as part of the Fuel Poverty Action Plan, it sits under the Health and Wellbeing Board, because there's government guidance, nice guidelines that say that the Health and Wellbeing Board should have a strategy for fuel poverty. But it also sits under the Homes and the Environment Board, because as we all know, fuel poverty is not something that it is just one area. It's not just health, it's not just environment, it's not just homes, it's a collective. And with that approach, we're hoping to have a more sort of across the board impact. We are currently we were hoping to get it finished, but unfortunately COVID has set our timeline back a bit, which has actually been fortunate in some ways. So we've produced a draft of the fuel poverty strategy, and I would absolutely welcome anybody's input or feedback into that draft. But one of the things that is becoming more and more apparent is exactly what Ed was speaking about, which is that the fuel poverty strategy, although it sits with the Health and Wellbeing Board, really has to, thank you, Lauren, really has to address this idea of a just transition. So where we're heading towards carbon neutrality by 2030, and we've got plans, in the climate strategy to be putting heat pumps and the heat networks into people's homes, that we're not actually pushing more people into fuel poverty as a consequence. And I think that there is a lot of work that needs to be done to say, how do we address people who are currently in fuel poverty, but also how do we stop more people going into fuel poverty as a consequence of our climate ambitions? And where the two used to be very much aligned, there's starting to be a disparity between reducing carbon and reducing fuel poverty. And that's my sort of ask, is a discussion around that, and any support or help that you want to give us for the fuel poverty strategy. I've got so much more I could say, but I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Hannah. And obviously, again, through the open discussion, you're welcome to raise any discussion points or add anything further when we get to that. So thank you again to all of our speakers. That was a really, really interesting range of perspectives and approaches and food for thought. So hopefully we've got a good discussion ahead. We've got just over half an hour left. The Blue Jeans software does cut out at the end of the meeting, so it will be 11:30 sharp that we'll finish if we are still going at that point, I'm afraid. But we can still maintain conversations going out of it. This is supposed to be a kind of catalyst for future discussions, so we're really hoping that people will stay in touch, ask questions of one another, engage with one another going forward, having learned a little bit more about what we're all working on. And myself and my colleagues in the BPI Institute, so Sarah's taking notes at the moment, and we've got Mel with us as well. We're going to produce a short summary of this event and that will be circulated to everyone here, and also the people who registered but weren't able to attend on the day. So you'll be able to have those kind of summary of the discussions, but also the names of the people here if you want to follow up with anyone or take anything forward, which would be great. And we'd love to hear what comes out of this as well. It's helps to know whether these seminars are working for us if you make connections out of them. So do keep us in the loop. And obviously, if there's anything we can do to support future developments, partnerships, bids, so forth, then do come to us and we'll try and help. But going back to you guys, because I've spoken far too much, I'm just going to do a quick kind of virtual roundtable. So I'm just going to work down the list of who's here in the kind of sidebar in that order. So if you can just say who you are, where you're from, and what your interests in these area are. When I call on you, then we'll move into the discussion. So the first person on the list is Aisha Stewart. Do you want to say hello, Aisha?
Hi.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, sorry.
That's all right.
Hi, my name's Aisha. I work in Hannah's team in the energy service, and I've been working on the fuel poverty work that we've been doing. I've been in and out of this meeting a bit because I've been redeployed onto another team to support the council. So, but it's been really, really interesting to kind of hear some of the work that other people are doing. I can't remember if I've answered all your questions. What we're supposed to do. Apologies.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Aisha. So the next person on the list who isn't a speaker, because obviously we've heard from them already, is Elizabeth Kavanagh.
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth. I work in the Policy Bristol team at the university, and my interest is sort of a professional one but also a personal one. I used to work in international development and I'm a renewable energy professional, so I've got kind of a cross-cutting interest in looking at how new renewable technologies can be deployed to support poor communities all over the world, really. So it's been really interesting, the discussion and looking at some of the comparisons between my international experience and how relevant they are to what we're trying to do towards moving to a 2030 net carbon zero locally as well.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So next on the list, we've got Joe Butchers.
Hi there, I'm a PhD student at Bristol. I'm working with Sam Williamson, one of the speakers today. My research is focused on small-scale hydropower and its reliability and sustainability. So looking at the full project cycle and how you can maintain sustainability right through from the beginning of a project and then after installation as well.
Great, thank you very much. Now we've got Katharina Berger.
Hi, my name is Kat Berger. I am a lecturer in management, operations management at the University of Bristol, and I'm interested in general terms in sustainable urban transitions and specifically in decision-making behavioral operations. So how we aid collective decision-making, but also change individual practices. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Kat. Next, we've got Mark Hyler. Oh, just needs to unmute your microphone, Mark. I'm afraid we still can't hear you. Okay, sorry about that. It doesn't look like his microphone's going to work today. So next on the list, so just having a scroll through, is Rosanna Chitchan.
Hi, it's me. I am a senior lecturer in computer science, and my interests are, well, my research is focused on software-supported transition to sustainable energy systems. And so I'm interested in looking at things like peer-to-peer trading, where maybe somebody is able to afford the generation facilities and somebody else can benefit from buying from those people at better rates than maybe otherwise would be available to them. I'm also interested in things like demand response, how to help people in optimizing their use. If you have to spend a certain amount, then you can potentially benefit from using at different times without necessarily inconveniencing yourself. Other things is also related to skills and training, how to prepare people to transition and how to ensure that the future energy system is supported by the skills that we are going to need in the future. And also in some of my work is related to co-design. So how do you engage and bring people together so that they can co-design the solutions which will address their own problems in the way that they want to see that resolved, and they can use it basically rather than putting the technology forward and saying, there you are, now deal with it somehow. So yeah, so these are the overall kind of areas in which I'm interested in. I should also mention, I was hoping that Hannah would pick it up, but she kind of maybe left it to me. The project that was mentioned before that BCC is interested in taking on the Horizon 2020 project on poverty. So this is something that I'm also very interested in engaging in, and I have volunteered to lead this on unless somebody more better qualified than me is willing to take this on. For example, you know, some of the speakers previously who have been working with plants, if they were interested in, I'm very happy to step aside. David Gordon, I think we kind of mentioned before, and he was not very keen, but I would very much support his candidacy here. And just a brief outline about how we're thinking about this project forward. Maybe we're thinking in terms of two directions that can be relevant to Bristol, and first one was about insulation and warmer homes and supporting the activities around cheese projects to be taken forward at a scale. And the other direction was looking at a model through which we can encourage communities to self-propel out of maybe less fortunate circumstances by using energy system as a driver. So, so one of our pieces of research that we did demonstrated that about 2/3 of people were prepared to partially or fully contribute they gained income from energy efficiency measures, for example, to invest into community activities. So if this were to be happening, then there is a potential of slowly but surely building assets which can help to increase the standing of that community with respect to how much fuel or energy they can afford and they can share out as well between themselves. So Hannah, do jump in if I have missed anything else in here, but we're really, really willing to discuss and engage with anybody who is interested.
Yeah, I don't think you've missed anything. I ran out of time on my presentation, which is why I didn't mention anything. But yeah, we certainly would welcome anybody who might be interested in this bid. I think the only thing that's worth mentioning is that it's very much a research project, Rosanna. Yeah, that it's not like Horizon 2020 Replicate, which was very much about measures and having sort of capital funding to actually install things. This is about evaluating and government policy, sort of evaluating and influencing government policy, I would say, rather than actual doing. So very much sits with what a lot of the university's work is, I would say. But yeah, anyone who wants any more details, I mean, Lauren, I don't know if it's worth just sharing the bid document after this meeting with everybody, and people can just have a look at it and see if they're interested. They can get in touch with Rosanna or with me, and we can talk about it further. And also we can share our concept document as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's any links or documents people want to be circulated with the post-event summary, then just send it through and I can incorporate that into the message. So that's no problem at all. And obviously we can come back to the bid in a minute if there's anyone who's got any questions or who's interested. We can discuss that when we move in. Just got a few more people on the intros to go through. So next is Sarah Davies.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I work for the Geography School of Geography as a sort of social researcher, particularly interested in household money management. But I've been doing a lot of work on the poverty premium over the last few years, and one sort of fairly key element of that is how people in low-income households end up paying more for fuel. So that was my kind of interest in this seminar today and in the Horizon 2020 bid, to see if there's something about the way people pay for fuel or how they choose a supplier that may reduce costs for them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. So now we've got Sarah Diver, please, from Bristol Energy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for a really interesting set of sessions today. Yeah, I'm working at Bristol Energy, and my background's kind of in heat networks. So I'm sort of working to support the rollout of heat networks in Bristol at the moment for Bristol Energy and the council. And I'm really interested in that kind of interplay between this sort of large-scale kind of top-down infrastructure investment to achieve our decarbonisation targets, but how we bring people along with that. So definitely picking up on some of the points that we've touched on earlier. Really interested to understand how Bristol can look holistically at what needs to happen to transition away, but also how that happens fairly within the monopoly market of a heat network. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff today. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Now we've got Will Clements.
Hi, I'm also a PhD student at Bristol, like Joe, and I'm working with Sam, and I'm looking at the transition to electric cooking for Nepal.
Great, thank you. And next on the list, we've got William Baker.
Hear me? Hi, so yeah, William Baker. I work for Citizens Advice. I'm the Energy Advice Development Lead there. In response to Colin's point, I do think it's important that local Citizens Advice provide energy advice along with all the other forms of advice that we provide. That's part of my role to try and increase that. I suppose one observation is that most people who come to us come through or in crisis, and energy isn't always the first thing on their minds, but we think it's important that they do actually receive advice on energy as well as other matters. And perhaps of interest for the Horizon 2020, I'm currently involved in delivering an existing Horizon 2020 project on energy poverty, which is actually primarily about delivering energy advice across 9 countries. I used to be the head of fuel poverty policy at Consumer Focus, and obviously, as Dave said, didn't have much success in persuading government to improve its fuel poverty policies. The one glimmer is there was Queen's speech, and in the Tory manifesto there was a promise to set up a £6 billion programme providing home upgrade grants for low-income households and a social housing decarbonisation programme. We had expected to see something in the March budget, but COVID was given precedence, although they still found money for road building. But that's something we're still putting a lot of pressure to try and make sure they deliver on those commitments. And finally, just to say I'm a trustee of a fuel poverty research network, and I'd really encourage people taking part in this to join the network. It basically aims to try and bring together academic researchers in other areas, and practitioners to create a forum so that research can influence policy and practice. And we're actually holding a conference. We were going to have it in October this year in Lisbon. It's been put back to next year because of COVID, but it's basically going to be on the theme of energy poverty and decarbonisation. We'll be inviting people to submit papers to that. We're also going to be announcing small grants for early career researchers and practitioners, which from autumn this year, which over about a 2-year program, and be really encouraging. What really particularly key to see is researchers and practitioners coming together to submit proposals for projects across both research and practice. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, William. Sounds like some really interesting opportunities to engage there. If you've got any more information on any of those at the moment, then do some through. I know you've already sent some through, which I will share in the post-event summary, but any information on the conference or anything else, I'm sure people will be really interested to know. And obviously after this, you'll have the list of attendees when I circulate that, so you can always just send on further down the line as and when further. That'd be great. Just got one more person to introduce. Oh, it looks like Mark has his microphone on now. Is that working, Mark?
It is, I hope.
Yes, it is, yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself now?
I'll have a quick go. My name is Mark Haler. I've retired after 35 years of working at City University in Hong Kong. And before that, I worked in the health services in the UK, in Tower Hamlets, and also at School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I have an interest in particular in community engagement, the use of social enterprises and the value that social enterprises can add to a whole range of policy areas. I am, as I say, retired and very keen to join or help people who may be able to find me of some use.
Great, thank you, Mark. Finally, we've got a listed as owner, but I believe that's Ruth London. Is that correct?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry to join very late because I was on a Zoom meeting about district heating regulation. I'm from Fuel Poverty Action, and we've always worked to ensure that what is helps with people's prices and affordability also works towards sustainability. And that's been a problem with district heating, in that a lot of district heating is brought in on the grounds of being low carbon, but then ends up costing consumers the earth it doesn't need to. And that kind of combination of affordability and sustainability is what we're working towards all the time. We do all sorts of like on the ground immediate work in relation to COVID and so on. We have a petition going now to make sure that what suppliers have actually put forward, agreed with the government, is actually implemented in supporting people who can't pay their bills at the moment. That's on our Fuel Poverty Action website, but a lot of different things, but that's just a taster.
Great, thanks very much. No, that's absolutely fine. So thank you for everyone for introducing themselves. I think we've heard from everybody now. So obviously with this format, it's a bit difficult to have an open discussion. So what I suggest is if you've got a question or a comment, if you just type your name in the chat window, then I'll call on you and we'll try and work through it that way. Because I can only see 9 videos at once, so if we just do raise your hands, then someone might be raising their hand and I can't see them. So hopefully this is a more equitable way of doing it. So I guess firstly, just do we have any questions for the speakers following their presentations? Any thoughts on any of those? Anything someone wanted to follow up or didn't have time to say? Then pop your name in the box and I'll give you a call. Yeah, so Caroline Bird, introduce another concept.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention Bristol Energy Network as well, which I mentioned earlier on briefly, but that's the other thing that I'm involved in outside of my university work. And Bristol Energy Network is an umbrella organisation for community energy in the city, and we take a very broad take on community energy, from an energy advice to generation to generation from renewables. So we're taking a very sort of sustainable approach, and we look at all aspects of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental. We developed a strategy with members in 2013 with 5 core areas, particularly starting with community resilience and addressing fuel poverty. That needs to underpin everything that communities can do subsequently. don't address that, then people don't have the capacity to engage in the energy system more widely. We engage in various projects, which helps to fund wider member support, particularly thinking about how we engage different communities across the city, particularly those communities that wouldn't necessarily engage with energy. So we think that's really an important way to bring new communities in and address that issue of fairness, equity and engagement. I can say more, but that'll do for now.
Okay, so while you're speaking, David Gordon has a question for you. So he's typed, how secure would remote control of appliances be? Could a hacker turn off your freezer when you're away for the weekend, for example?
You would set preferences so that you make sure things don't get turned off that you don't want to get turned off. Yes, for sure, we need to make sure we take account of all of that, and they are concerns that people raised in the interview process when we looked at that. Yes, so whatever happened, people would need to know what's going on. So that's part of some sort of app that you'd set up if that's what we were going to do.
Yeah, great, thank you. So we've got a question from Rosanna to Ed. Rosanna, do you want me to read it out or do you want to go ahead yourself?
So yeah, I was wondering, Ed mentioned quite a lot of things about the energy justice, and I was wondering if there are any solutions that he can come up as examples to how to resolve issues around this. I'm thinking about other than monetary payment for, okay, you've been displaced, here's the money for you to move somewhere else, to build the dam, I mean.
Yeah, I would say when you look at kind of large scale infrastructure projects, a lot of the dissent and contestation that surrounds them is driven by three different types of injustice. You've got a maldistribution of costs and benefits, which I brought up in the presentation, which is very often based around regional dynamics and regional development. So there's wider questions there which need to be discussed when building a large energy project. There's also participation, so it's key to ensure that communities not only participate in decision making, but actually have a say in kind of project implementation, be it in terms of timelines, and also participation about the use of the energy. So you see with wind farms, for example, as well in national grids, there's dissent from local communities because the energy is being generated on their landscape, but being used elsewhere. So it's building in some form of participatory mechanism to ensure those that dissent can be aired. And then lastly, recognition. So recognition of a difference in evaluation of a landscape. A river is not just a river to the people who live on it. It's not just a battery to be used by different communities elsewhere. There needs to be this three-pronged approach when it comes to justice and large-scale energy projects. When it comes to city-based energy efficiency projects, for example, that's a different question, which I'm sure others will be much more, have more expertise to discuss. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. So I know Sam Williamson wants to come in on the energy justice comments.
Yes, just very quickly. A project that I was working on in Nepal a few years back, they were building a 20 megawatt hydropower plant in the middle of the Himalayas, surprisingly enough. And what they did to enable the local community to be involved in this, sorry, I don't have lights, the local community to be involved in this a bit more was to, the local community effectively bought shares in the scheme through their labour, and they were able to contribute to that. And so not only were they able to get power from it, but they were able to have an additional income from that hydropower plant through their shares when that hydropower plant went live. It still hasn't gone live for a lot of political and administration issues, but it's that sort of concept, I think, is an interesting one to be able to allow that. So you don't just have money. This money was actually coming in from China, and so effectively that any income from that would have gone straight out, and that enabled the local community to have this buy-in to that, which I thought was an interesting concept.
Great, thank you. So has anyone got any follow-up on this? I think Rosanna's just unmuted, so did you want to?
I just wanted to say that sounds like a brilliant solution to things like heat networks as well. Of course, there is an issue that the labor will not be necessarily contributed for by the people, but it will be a construction company doing that. But a similar kind of approach might be something that would potentially allow those who are not necessarily able to otherwise gain from these heat networks to in some way contribute and get a share, not necessarily in monetary, but in some other terms. But good idea. And if we have time,
yeah, go ahead.
I was also interested to find out. So we already mentioned that, okay, so the policy recommendations that David, for example, talked about didn't actually go forward. So what do we do now? Do you have some like what next? How do you actually get forward with plans that you have been proposing so that it's listened to? Those are listened to by the government?
Shall I just reply to that? The UK passed legislation to eradicate fuel poverty as far as reasonably possible by 2016 or 2018. It was one of the few legally binding targets on the government. The government's response was to not do what was necessary when it came to the target date to just repeal the legislation. So those kinds of legally binding targets, arguably it was one of the biggest policy failures in British government history. They set themselves something which was written into law they had to achieve, and fuel poverty had increased rather than decreased by that time using the old measures. So those kinds of problems are just those kinds of solutions aren't going to work. I mean, because we've tried it and it didn't work. One thing that's happening is because of COVID-19, there's no reason not to use the crisis. I'm concerned that there will be a large number of excess winter deaths because of the impoverishment of the population once the furlough and other government schemes have expired in late autumn, it looks like at the moment. And that would lead to a massive increase in fuel poverty this winter and presumably also a massive increase in excess winter deaths. And I think given the public's concern about COVID-19 and the number of deaths it causes, that's something that networks that such as People of William and others are involved in might want to start advocating, and local authorities might want to start advocating that the government needs to think now about how it's going to tackle fuel poverty this coming winter. So I think that's a possibility for getting some policy shift. The government has, after the complete failure of the Green Deal, said it will do something about fuel poverty. It said that before, but it was in the Queen's speech and in the Tory manifesto. So that a push is needed to get the government to actually do something. And this autumn, with the concern over excess winter deaths, may be the time to push the government to do that. So that would be my advice. Okay, stop now. William, do you want to answer that as well?
Okay, yes, certainly. I think what's been one thing that's come out very clearly from the government's response is that the government can move fast and it can take quite radical action when it wants to, and a lot of us would expect would be very much arguing it should take some fairly radical action in terms of response to COVID-19 and the importance of improving people's homes. In terms of sort of things people could do to try and influence government policy, fuel poverty action network is one, which is probably focused more on direct action type initiatives, but has quite an extensive network. And another group is the End Fuel Poverty Coalition, which I used to chair, and that tends to focus more on trying to influence legislation. there are actually now new fuel poverty targets, which have problems, but they are targets which we'd certainly want to try and hold the government to account to, and that's targets on improving people's homes to basically an EPCC standard, which is a standard of homes built today. I think, given the academic presence in this, but also others, that research evidence can make a play, but it's making sure that those campaigning organisations and coalitions like the End Fuel Poverty Coalition have access to that and use it, and bring the public with it in terms of trying to get the government to take the action that's needed.
I think Ruth wanted to on this as well.
Yes, thanks. In terms of government action, what they seem to be focusing on is deferring everything so that everybody gets into more and more debt. So that, oh yes, we'll give you a holiday on the payments, but you still have to pay it back. And that is for people who are short of money, just won't use the heating because they don't want to run up the debt. We have a proposal which we're not putting forward strongly at the moment, but we think it could be a more long-term solution, which is to a warm floor, basically a universal level of energy that everybody gets free, and then increase the tariffs for people who use more than that. That obviously has to come with protection for people who actually need more than it, more than the floor, for age reasons or whatever. But it would reverse the current situation where people actually pay more per unit if they use less because of the standing charge, which is really perverse. And for people who cut down to practically zero and ration their usage to half an hour or an hour a day, having to pay this swapping standing charge is a really heavy burden, and you have to pay it up front on a prepayment meter as well before you even get any energy. So to reverse it and have a certain amount that would give people security, a level of security, as things change, what with COVID and jobs and also, decarbonization and different kinds of heating, it would give something. And we need people like yourselves to help us with that, because we're a grassroots organization. We're very small, we're unfunded, and we don't have people who can crunch numbers and decide, what level that could be set at and what are the pros and cons even, although we can think of quite a few ourselves. So, if there's anybody here who would like to work on that with us, we'd be really appreciative. We're calling it the warm floor, and it's had quite a lot of interest in Europe. I presented it in Brussels at an energy meeting with a lot of high up energy bods there, and people were very interested in it there. We've had some interest from inside the Labour Party, and from people who are thinking about other universal kind of benefits and so on. So, it's not a non-starter, but it needs working out on a bit more detailed level.
Great. So I see in the comments box that David Gordon has mentioned he'd be interested in helping with that, so we can put the two of you in touch after this meeting.
Thank you.
To follow up. Yeah. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. So has anyone got any final comments or questions? I think Rosanna is waving.
Yeah, I just want to ask, I'm not very clear, is it going to be possible to circulate the list of contacts, and so that are people happy for us to get in touch?
Yes.
Because I think there will be quite a lot of things we might potentially want to pick up with some people. Is it, I mean, for data protection, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously if anyone be included on that list, then let us know, but we're working on the assumption that if people are happy to be recorded, then they're happy for their names to be listed. Yeah, we would be, I think it was one of the original emails, it should have been there as well, that we'll be circulating lists of attendees. So Obviously, if someone doesn't want to be on that list, let me know by email, and I can take you off. But otherwise, yes, it will be circulated to everyone here. That won't be. We're going to be putting the recording on the website if the quality is sufficient, but we won't be circulating that document to anyone who wasn't registered for the event. There are a couple of people who registered, but due to childcare issues or other personal issues, weren't able to attend on the day from inside the university, so they will be included, but it won't be going more widely than that. Okay, so we've literally only got 1 minute left, and I think Blue Jeans is going to cut us off, I'm afraid. And I think we could potentially keep this conversation going for quite some time. So do get in touch either with myself or with anyone else directly to follow up conversations. We're very happy to help facilitate conversations to see what we can do to support bid development, and with our colleagues in the Research and Enterprise Division who can offer support. There is an EU funding team who might be able to help with the Horizon 2020 bid. I believe Heather Saxton has already linked into that. So yeah, do keep in touch, keep these conversations going. It is supposed to be, like I said, the start of the discussion and the network. So it's hopefully been interesting. Hopefully you've learned something else or thought about a perspective you maybe hadn't considered before, energy and fuel poverty. So thank you for coming. And yeah, please do keep in touch, and hopefully see you at another event soon.